So after watching the Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door previews from various different news outlets, I have just been so content with everything that they've shown. I mean, it is just a beautiful remake, and the music and everything just sounds so good, and I can't wait to dive into this game. I mean, the worlds just look vastly different and just so much better with this new lighting and the new engine and everything. It's just great. But somehow people are still complaining, of course, and there's people online that maybe just don't like the new remixes, and that's fine. There's a badge where you can listen to the old themes, and then some people may not like the over-dramatic look of some of the worlds. It's too clean or too shiny and sparkly, and I get that, you know, whatever. It's still a beautiful remake. I don't understand why people would want to complain about, you know, a game looking better, but still, yeah, mostly people are pretty content with this, and I think a lot of people are on board with this remake, except for one aspect. And I've seen a lot of people arguing about this online, and that's the frame rate. So the original Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door ran at 60 frames per second, where the remake runs at 30 frames per second. And I see people absolutely losing their minds over this on the internet. And I just have some things to say about this. So for one, I see a lot of people immediately defending this by saying gamers don't even know what 60 and 30 FPS means half the time. They just, you know, complain about it, and they probably wouldn't even notice it in most games. Where this could be true very well depending on the game, but I can say right now, as somebody who never really had a problem with it until recently, once I actually figured out how good 60 frames per second can run, I can 100% notice it every single time I play a game now. It just feels so much smoother to play in 60 frames per second. I've had this same experience with, for instance, Sonic Frontiers, which actually has a performance mode, and once I turned it on 60 frames per second, it was just like smooth, silky butter, man. And it's just the only way I'd rather play a game. I'd rather take visual quality down just to have that smoothness, because it can mean a lot with every little input. And that's very important for games like action adventures or something where you need well-timed button presses and stuff like that. So I understand. And that's why Mario Odyssey feels so clean. That's why Mario moves and jumps and dives and rolls so fresh, because it runs at a smooth 60 frames per second. And a lot of people won't even notice this because they're just used to playing Mario Odyssey. But if something happened where there was an update or a downgrade update where it's pretty much they switched it to 30 frames per second but made it look cleaner, people would notice. People would be like, this feels laggy. Mario's moving a little weirder, you know, and it is very noticeable if you are having a true night and day experience. Like if you're able to toggle it, you will notice it more. And this is something that I've noticed is a constant argument with every game that releases from Nintendo. It's the first thing that people want to find out is, what is the frame rate? Because yes, a game can look good, but if that frame rate is 30 FPS, people are going to complain because it's not as smooth. I mean, take Luigi's Mansion 3, for example. I remember a lot of people were complaining about that frame rate, and there was lots of rooms where it did get kind of stuttery, but it is the best looking game on the Switch, in my opinion, or at least one of the best looking games. So you got to pick one or the other in certain situations. But another thing I want to point out is that it also, like I said before, depends on the type of game. Luigi's Mansion 3 isn't a 3D platformer or action adventure where you're moving around and have to have well-timed button presses. It's a very slow-paced, walking around, finding mysteries, solving mysteries, you know, catching ghosts at a very slow rate. You know, it's not like you're extremely fast and flying around and you could just really notice it. Most of the time, I guarantee you, a lot of you probably still didn't even know Luigi's Mansion 3 was 30 FPS because you were too busy taking in all the sights, looking at how good this game looked and just enjoying the game, because it doesn't really matter in a game like that. Now, I will say there are games that ran at 30 frames per second that I believed should have ran at 60 frames per second, and you can notice them if you're really paying attention. For instance, Kirby and the Forgotten Land was something that I've noticed right away, but at the same time, a lot of people probably didn't. A lot of people probably just thought the game was fun and ran just as good as any other game would for them. But yes, it's very noticeable if you know what you're looking for. If you have that experience with 60 frames per second games and remember how that feels or have a direct comparison, you will notice it feels a lot different. Especially something with like Kirby and the Forgotten Land that's a 3D action adventure platformer, you're gonna notice it a lot more. But we're talking about Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, a turn-based RPG. And I'm here to say, day, you're probably not even going to notice it. I mean, seriously, this game just already looks beautiful, and it's a very slow-paced game. You're, once again, walking around, solving mysteries, just reading dialogue, just overall doing things in a lot slower of a pace. This isn't a 3D or 2D action-adventure or platformer or anything like that, so in my eyes, you don't really need it to be 60 frames per second. Now, the only argument I could hear is the time button presses when it comes to battling. So with battling in Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, you have to tap the A button at a very specific time to dodge and to deal damage. Let's face it, it's always been pretty lenient, but it is a little bit different that it is going to be at 30 frames per second, because there is a super guard that you can do where you don't take any damage and instead you actually deal damage. But the problem with this is it is in a 3-frame window, which is 3/60th of a second before contact. So you would have 3 active frames in order to land this thing, and it was already hard enough at 60 frames per second. This might make things extremely difficult to super guard at 30 frames per second, and I can see some people having a problem with that. And I know most people would be like, just normal guard. You don't need to try to go for the super guards. You know, that's just very, very hard to land in the first place. You don't need to go for that. I mean, but that's just like a stupid argument, because it's like, hey, don't use this mechanic of the game because it doesn't work right with the FPS, you know? So yeah, I can see the side of some people that are a little upset by that, because button press timing is pretty important in this game, you know, very similar to something like Rhythm Heaven, where you have to have rhythmic timing. Now, the problem is the performance with that 30 FPS, because apparently from IGN, they claim they experienced some huge stutter and slowdown, and you can even see it in this video. I didn't slow anything down. This is their actual gameplay, and you can just see there is a lot of stutter when there's a lot of NPCs on the screen, when all the X-Knots jump Mario at the beginning of Rogueport. Yes, it does look a little chuggy, and this might become a problem later on in the game as some scenes start getting more crazy and more NPCs are added and more characters are on the screen. So hopefully this isn't a huge problem, but yeah, dropping even lower than 30 FPS at times can be seen as pretty bad. But what's funny about this is I saw a lot of other outlets say during their preview that they didn't really notice any slowdown at all, that it was just, you know, smooth 30 FPS the entire time. So I don't know, maybe it just depends on your certain situation, and maybe it's random. I don't really know right now. Another thing I want to point out though is, thankfully there's nothing really super crazy that you need perfect button time presses for. For instance, like in Mario RPG, thankfully that was 60 frames per second, because to get the super suit, you needed pretty much 100 perfect jumps, which is tedious as heck, and you need a really good frame rate for something like that. I mean, so good in fact that a lot of people were taking the Switch out of the dock because it's so hard to get that a perfect 100 jumps. Yeah, you have the multi-bounce boots, which technically could be the same thing. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's gonna be some people that don't like it. There's gonna be some people that just don't care, and it just depends on the user and, you know, who's playing at that time. But I understand some of the complaints, but I also don't understand how this would take somebody to the point where they don't want to buy the game. I've legit seen people say, I think I might wait for the next console or something like that. No, it's Paper Mario. You don't need 60 frames per second at this time. If you're still worried, just look at this tweet from Andy Robinson from VGC. He states, 30 FPS is absolutely fine for a turn-based RPG. I've been playing the Thousand Year Door remake for over a week, and it's gorgeous. I didn't notice the frame rate at all until readers started asking. So yes, relax, most of you probably wouldn't even notice this thing. But to me, this is just even more of a reason why we need this new console. The current Nintendo Switch has been great for the last 7 years, but at the same time, it is severely underpowered compared to some of the other consoles in the market and stuff. And we need this new console, because I see people all the time say, we don't need Switch 2, we just need more games because the console's great. The console is great. But yes, we should be able to have 1080p 60 frames per second at the least, when games right now are running at 4K, and it's just like, yeah, this is something that, you know, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door should be able to run at 60 frames per second when you think about it, when it's all said and done. You know, that's just my point. And yes, we need this next console. And that's the thing as well, is a lot of people aren't really thinking about the fact that the rumors right now are suggesting that this next console is going to be backwards compatible, which means you can play pretty much every Switch game with this new Switch, which would probably just obviously make sense. There's no way Nintendo would abandon their Switch library like that. But yeah, you'll probably be able to play something like Paper Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door at 60 frames per second on the new console. Yes, it sucks that we had to wait until, you know, probably like a year after this game comes out to finally get this new console or something and play it, but still, just think to yourself, you know, eventually we'll be able to play this game in 60 frames per second. Maybe, hopefully. That's what I'm guessing. But definitely let me know what you think about this. Does this 30 frames per second Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door nonsense make you upset? Do you care? Is it something that's going to, you know, inflict your opinion on this game a lot more, or make you, you know, more or less like it or dislike it? Just let me know all your opinions in the comments down below. And thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe before you head out. We are getting so close to 300,000 subscribers, and you can help us reach it. Let's see how many people we can get to subscribe from this one video. But thank you so much for tuning in. And like always, I'll see you all on the next one. See you guys.